Hello everyone, I'm Josipa, President of International Cultural Diversity Organization. Today we are opening Long Nights of Interculturality 2020 virtual for the first time. I'm very happy that we are all here reunited in safeguarding diversity in these conditions. We're going virtual because we all know that in all parts of the world we are facing pandemics, we are facing a lot of challenges. So ICDO decided that to give access to everyone this year to join virtually, to be part of Long Nights of Interculturality by joining us, by speaking up, by talking about marginalized groups, by talking about health situation, by talking about climate change, by talking about women empowerment, by learning about other cultures through documentaries that we have, learning about other cultures, the costumes of the world that we have, more than 170 costumes. We are all united in this fight. Everyone is interconnected, and this is why the topic of this year, Long Nights of Interculturality, is reunited in safeguarding diversity. So please join us. We have a rich schedule and rich program every day of art exhibitions, documentaries, and much more. Hashtag safeguarding diversity. Join us on Instagram, YouTube channel, Facebook, Twitter, and we welcome you all. Our team has been working very hard so everyone can join from all parts of the world. Thank you.
Welcome everybody, my name is Alberto Nodale, I'm an ICDO ambassador. I'm happy to welcome you to the Long Nights of Interculturality 2020 under UNESCO patronage. And yeah, we switched it to an online format, of course, due to COVID and the safety measures. We all want to stay safe, but still give you an exciting event with great insights. So I'm happy to give you some insights of very interesting people with great cultural backgrounds. Me, myself, I'm half Filipino, half Austrian, so I'm very pleasured to be able to host this event for you online this time. I'm very honored to host and open the Long Nights of Interculturality 2020 under UNESCO patronage and introduce you to our extraordinary guests, the ambassadors of the respected embassies in Vienna. Her Excellency Maria Cleofe Natividad, Ambassador of the Philippines to the Republic of Austria.
Thank you once again for joining us in the opening day of the Long Nights of Interculturality 2020.
Yes, and I thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. I thank you very much, Madam President Josipa and the International Cultural Diversity Organization for inviting me to be part of the distinguished panelists for the big opening of your Long Nights of Interculturality. It is my joy and honor to be able to participate in this very interesting topic that we have before us for discussion. Thank you, and Dankeschön.
Danke auch. So, question. We know that COVID-19 still presents enormous challenges for communities around the world to adequately respond to health and social crises, and increases differences between certain groups of the societies which are being disproportionately affected, such as ethnic, racial, or religious minority groups, women or children. So how would you assess the situation in your respective country in relation to COVID-19, not only in terms of health, but also the overall socioeconomic situation, especially focusing on gender equality, racial, ethnic discrimination, and inclusion? In which way are disadvantaged groups affected by this crisis in terms of healthcare access, economic and social status? In briefly, are we all affected in the same way, and are the information about health issues accessible to everyone?
Okay, thank you very much for this very substantive question that you have posed. But please allow me to preface my reply by giving you like an overview of the Philippines and our indigenous peoples composition. The Philippines is a country of 7,600 islands and with a population of around 16.2 million. The indigenous people's population is roughly 15% of that, or perhaps 118 million. And but I am very pleased and quite proud to say that the Philippines is the first country in Asia and is one of the few countries in the world to legally recognize the rights of indigenous people. The country's Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, or the IPRA of 1997, is an exemplary law that is focused on social justice, and it also has become a model for what would later become the UN Declaration on Indigenous Peoples. So I'm very proud of what we have done so far, and we hope that our initiatives, our program of the government will be able to we will be able to pursue this in spite of the current pandemic that has besieged not only the Philippines but the entire world. It is with sadness that I would report that so far the Philippines had cases of around 250,000 people affected by the pandemic, and very sadly, we have had 4,000 deaths. And while the Philippines, fortunately at this time, has flattened the curve, and we are able to better handle the situation, also through the Philippine President Rodrigo Roa Duterte's very focused leadership, including that of giving a financial aid and a financial package in order for the country to move on. The recovery and addressing the situation has, of course, also structural inequalities that affects disproportionately those who are in the vulnerable sector. And when I say vulnerable, those are the people who are quite marginalized because of their geographical and location in isolated areas, and needless to say, also children and women who are living in poverty and are underrepresented. So this is a situation that the Philippines is now faced, and but is doing its best to address the vulnerabilities of this group of people that I have mentioned to you.
Thank you, and thank you for this remarkable work that Philippines are doing for indigenous groups. It's a great example also for others how to proceed when dealing with indigenous groups. So as you mentioned that indigenous groups for example, the Igorot in the Philippines are still living in a very isolated areas with lack of access, as you mentioned, to basic social services. And there are fewer opportunities for them for major economic activities, education, or political participation. My question would be, how important is preservation of their heritage for the people in the Philippines? And can you also tell us a little bit more about integration and culturally sensitive approaches that you already mentioned a little bit previously to inclusion of indigenous communities in the Philippines?
Okay, I am happy to address this question, particularly when you mentioned about the Igorot, because they are a group of people that is also personally quite close to my heart. But let me also state that the indigenous people in the Philippines are not only found in the northern uplands or highlands mountain area of the Philippines, but they are spread all throughout the three major islands of the country, especially also in the southern part. So you find our ethnic indigenous groups in the northern uplands, also all the way down to the southern seas of the Philippines, from the Igorots to the Lumads of the south. So they are all over the country. And the cultural diversity, diverse society, in a society such as us in the Philippines, the preservation of the heritage of indigenous people is very important because it affirms our identity as a people. We are a group of people that is not homogeneous, we are heterogeneous. So it's important that we recognize them, we respect their cultural identities, we respect who they are, so we can have a better understanding, closer national cohesion and unity. Now, in terms of the pandemic, um, the pandemic has actually brought some interesting facets to the way we approach the situation. You know, the National Commission on Indigenous People has provided specific assistance to our indigenous groups. They have provided at least food aid and packages to some 3,000 of them, specifically those who are in the southern part in Mindanao. But what is also interesting are the response of these ethnic groups. Some of them actually were hesitant to receive this aid. And what they did was, okay, they accepted the aid that was given by the government, but not for themselves. They distributed these food packages, this food assistance to the other members that are outside their community, because they themselves are sufficient in their own food production. Being in the uplands, they're able to plant. And so I think their way of living is even more sustainable than those of us who are in the city, and they are just used to being in touch with nature. And so they have their own way of coping. But what really surfaced was the kindness, the generosity of these people. Although they might consider themselves different, they are very much a part of the bigger society that they are working on. And so they have been giving this food assistance. And also the pandemic has highlighted and brought forth to our consciousness the many ways wherein they are trying to cope through their own ritual. You know, from the tausugs to the talandings to the manubos group, they have their own ritual where they perform dances and songs to call into their deities, to call into their gods. And somehow, you know, it gives them comfort. It gives them, it's the faith actually that enables them to survive. Of course, aside from this, it is also important that the government continues its effort to bring the scientific aspect of healthcare to these people, because they are in the outer lying areas. The healthcare services and practitioners must bring to them, you know, the modern developments of science. But when I say it also that the Igorots are close to my heart, here in the Philippine community in Vienna, we recently held an award to recognize the frontliners, the Filipino-Austrian frontliners who have been helping the Austrians to survive, you know, and get through this pandemic. And one of the frontliners is a medical health practitioner, medical health professional, and she is an Igorot. And her name is Marjorie Kistoy, and we gave her an award. And the Philippine TV national network featured her in one of their TV shows, and proudly as a member of the Upland Cordillera Indigenous Group. So we are very proud that this pandemic, it has a lot of drawbacks, but in terms of the indigenous people, we are able to focus more attention to them, focus on their plight, what is their reality, and also what they can give back to the Philippines as a whole. I'm sorry for my long remark, but I'm just excited about the issue.
No, actually, this is beautiful what you're saying. The generosity and kindness of Filipinos is amazing, and I congratulate the award-winning here in Austria, but also everyone around the world, all the Filipinos who are working in health sector and who are showing their kindness in this situation. So congratulations once again.
And may I say that I'm truly very proud of the community that I represent here in Austria and the three other countries that the Philippine Embassy covers, including Slovenia, Croatia, and Slovakia. Our people there are truly our heroes in how valiantly and bravely and selflessly they have been giving themselves in order to help their respective communities to make it through this difficult, unprecedented times.
Yeah, I have to say we work with Filipino communities for already 3 years, and they are remarkable. Their will, their engagement, their proactivity is really an example for others. So thank you all Filipinos and Filipino community in Austria, Croatia, and all the other countries, and thank you for your leadership also. So when we talk about, let's go to a little bit more multidisciplinary approaches to college. So there are different segments of the society, as you mentioned also, healthcare providers, public agencies, policymakers, NGOs, academia, representatives, journalists, and all of them have a role to play in helping to promote fair and equal access to health. And to prevent the spread of COVID-19, we must all work together to ensure that everyone is included. As you mentioned, people with indigenous background, migrant background, minorities, vulnerable groups. So this also means ensuring equal access to information about healthcare available also in different languages. So I would ask you, from your expertise and your knowledge, how much is multidisciplinary work important for long-term solutions, such as cultural diversity, gender equality, or, as you already mentioned a lot, indigenous knowledge about protection of nature in terms of health and social protection?
You're right, Madam President, that multidisciplinary approach is very, very important. In fact, in the Philippines, the President has launched this program, We Heal as One. We heal as one, meaning to say that we approach the problem from all its multivarious aspects. You know, when we address this situation, we only do not look at it from an entirely health situation. We have to look at it from all a spectrum of disciplines. From the point of view of history, we have to understand the indigenous people. From that point, from the anthropological, sociological point of view, from the healthcare point of view, and from the political point of view. It is very important that it is a whole of a nation approach, and approaching it also from the various disciplines. It could not be one, because if you approach it only from one perspective, then it becomes very narrow and it will not be an enduring, sustainable approach. So when I say this, when we approach the indigenous people's situation, we provide them political voice. We provide them economic wherewithal in order to be sustainable. We provide them all the social, cultural assistance that they would need in order to promote and to protect and to preserve their tradition. You know, our indigenous groups in the Philippines are also suffering in terms of their security, because of course they are in the areas that the government services sometimes could not reach adequately in terms of security. They have been subjected to harassment and also to actually conflict and attacks by the subversive elements of the society, and the government has been addressing this very strongly. I had a chance to meet with some of the indigenous group, And my heart really bled for them when they said that, they were being harassed, the women especially, subjected to physical abuse, rape, and harassment. And they feel so helpless. And my heart goes out to them. And so this is a call for us to really focus on their situation because of their location without the government being too intrusive. We have to find this delicate balance, but there is a need to extend to them greater protection from these rude elements that unfortunately are still present in the Philippine society. But on the lighter side, when you say traditional practices, I myself, also observe their traditional way of healing. The traditional herbal medicines, and even for my hair, for my, I try to get tips from them. How do they preserve their beautiful skin, especially the uplanders, and also, how do they manage it? How they manage to treat their common diseases, just using the herbal and the traditional medicine. So it's exciting. I think we always have to look at a situation half full rather than half empty. There are always there are drawbacks, but there are always so many positive things that we could draw lessons from.
Thank you so much. In some near future, we would like to share those tips with us also. So, as you mentioned, that there is still a challenges that are being faced. So, what can we, as diplomats, experts, civil society activists, and a society in general, what can we do to create more inclusive social and health policies? And what can we do that this leads to the more sustainable development and safeguarding of cultural and also biodiversity in these areas?
Now, thank you very much, Madam Josipa, for asking this question. And because this is something that is part of my advocacy, I would like to call on every stakeholder for us to join our forces together to have a concerted, a unified, coordinated approach in order to address this situation. The government by itself, the Philippine government by itself, could not address this single-handedly. But if we join forces, the international, intergovernmental organizations, NGOs like yours, which has been very active and pursuing very worthy initiatives, and the other private companies, if we put all our efforts together, I think we can come up with a very comprehensive, suitable, and very responsive action. For instance, from the IGOs, we and other international organizations, we could seek help in terms of coming up with more appropriate aggregated data for these ethnic communities. Part of it is that we do not have all the information that we have, especially on gender, especially on the critical numbers, so that the appropriate policy can be instituted. And of course, there is also financial assistance that we could provide to them, because it takes wherewithal, it takes resources to preserve traditions that are fast diminishing, and also to give them education without necessarily converting or changing them. This is very important. And finally, organizations like yours could be active in terms of soft power approach. Culture. That is key to understanding our diversity by promoting our greater people-to-people exchanges. Because if it is only when we are able to interact and feel each other, can we truly be able to move forward and change the world for the better. So I applaud the ICDO for the great work you are doing, and the Philippine Embassy and Mission, on behalf of my team, looks forward to greater and stronger collaboration with you and your future projects. Thank you very much, and maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat.
Thank you very much for these kind words, and we are also looking forward to future cooperation. And thank you for the great work that you're doing in the communities and also promoting indigenous and cultural diversity of Philippines. Thank you so much for being part of also opening of the Long Nights of Interculturality in this new virtual edition. Thank you.
Mr. Emil Stojanovski, Deputy Head of Missions of Australia Embassy to the United Nations in Vienna.
Thank you very much for joining us for the Long Night of Interculturality 2020 in this virtual conference. We are very pleased to have Australia joining us for the first time, and we are very looking forward to hear more about diversity and different approaches of dealing with COVID in Australia, and we hope to learn also something from Australia case. So thank you, Mr. Emil Stojanovski, for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak virtually in this setting. It's an honour to have been invited to present today among such distinguished colleagues as well. And the discussion topic that you've picked is it's a really interesting one. It's also a really broad one, and one which I can't hope to do justice in 10 minutes. So I think I'll just focus on how Australia, as one of the world's most multiracial and multi-ethnic societies, has responded and continues to respond to the needs of our population during the COVID pandemic. And I would actually like to start with one of the questions that was posed to us as panelists. And the question was, are we all affected in the same way? And is the information about health issues accessible to everyone? And of course, the short answer is no, we are not all affected in the same way. Among all of the participants here and all of those joining online, our needs are different. Our circumstances are different. Some of us have health conditions that have been exacerbated by the pandemic, including mental ill health. Some of us are more resilient than others. Some have a larger network of family and friends that we can draw on in tough times. And some of us still have jobs, while others have lost everything. So with such diversity of experience and impact, how can governments and societies respond to a global pandemic in an inclusive manner? Or perhaps more appropriately, where does the role of government end and that of communities and individuals begin? So let me focus on the issue of access to information. As individuals, as members of different communities, as government officials, business owners, employees, employers, we all have access to different sources of information. In fact, part of the challenge we face is that we have access to too much information. Some tell us that we need to drastically alter our actions to fear for our lives and livelihoods. Some tell us that COVID-19 is a conspiracy or a hoax. And in between, we have so much data and advice from different levels of government, health authorities, local doctors, employers, family and friends. And to make things worse, this information and advice is changing constantly, sometimes on a daily basis. So how can we hope to keep up? How can we ensure that all the information that is being given to us is accurate and that all members of society understand it? COVID-19 has really underscored the magnitude of this challenge, even in the most developed of countries. And with all the resources that countries like Australia have, we have hardly emerged from this crisis with flying colours. So I spare a thought for my colleagues also on this panel who are representing less developed countries as to how they are coping with the demands placed on their governments at this time. It cannot be easy. And I also spare a thought right now for my own countrymen and women, more than 5 million of whom, as I speak, are living under the world's longest and strictest of lockdowns. The virus's second wave has hit Australia hard, especially the city of Melbourne. And as Australia emerges from the depths of winter, millions of people are unemployed, unable to work, unable to restart businesses, and unable to leave their homes except in limited circumstances. Now, governments are doing all they can to respond on so many fronts: healthcare, welfare, aged care, as they face unprecedented strains. And never before in Australia's history have so many people looked to government to provide so much. And governments, bureaucracies, healthcare systems across the world have been overwhelmed by the health and economic impacts of this crisis. And it is understandable, therefore, that the diverse needs of diverse communities within countries may not always have been at the forefront of planning, advice giving, and service delivery. And we take Australia, for example. Out of a population of just over 25 million people, there are 7.5 million migrants living in Australia. Some 300 languages are spoken in my country, including Indigenous languages that have a long and rich history. How do we make sure that non-English speakers in Australia understand what is happening, what advice government is providing, and where they can seek further help in a manner that they can understand? Now, government officials have been working overtime to ensure that the needs of diverse communities are being met. The Australian Government's online COVID-19 information portal is available in 63 languages, from Bosnian to Burmese, Pashto to Punjabi, Tagalog to Turkish. The state governments in Australia have also translated their websites and information packs into many languages as well. But we've not always got it right. State governments were earlier criticised for not doing enough to reach into migrant communities across Australia. And there is much that we have learnt since the onset of the second wave that hit Australia in mid-June about what advice migrant communities are receiving, where they're receiving it from, and importantly, how accurate that advice is. And it's the accuracy of that advice that has really kept us on our toes. In fact, misinformation and disinformation has never been more harmful, more deadly than during this pandemic. Governments around the world are doing everything they can to counter the spread, not just of the virus, but of the misinformation and disinformation that also spreads like wildfire. And in an increasingly interconnected world, where information is at our fingertips, we must constantly be on guard to ensure our populations and communities are not at risk of serious harm as a result of deliberate and willful disinformation campaigns. Be in no doubt, we are up against some very well-organised malign actors, some of them state-sponsored. And while Australia was in the midst of fighting the first wave, we had to dedicate resources to discover, take down, and counter the disinformation that was being put out across digital platforms. Resources that could have been spent actually fighting the spread of the virus were instead diverted to countering disinformation. It is truly shameful. And the worst thing about disinformation is that it has the most harmful effects on the most vulnerable members of our society, such as senior citizens, newly arrived migrants with limited English skills, people with intellectual disabilities, and of course, our Indigenous population. Now, Indigenous people represent less than 3% of Australia's population, but they are always at the forefront of our minds when it comes to protecting Australians' health and well-being. And this is for the sad reality that Indigenous Australians experience poorer health and die younger than non-Indigenous Australians. They experience much greater mortality and burden from chronic disease than non-Indigenous Australians. And they experience high levels of psychological distress than non-Indigenous Australians, particularly among young people. 2/3 of our Indigenous people live in rural and remote communities of Australia. So when COVID-19 arrived on our shores, knowing that remote Indigenous communities would be hit hardest were the virus to spread amongst their populations, the Australian government enacted strict restrictions for those able to enter and leave the communities. Now, those restrictions were gradually eased after July, as different circumstances across the communities required different approaches, empowering communities themselves to manage risk and respond to cases early. Now, to date, One of Australia's greatest successes is that there has been no reported case of COVID-19 among Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in remote communities. But this is just one small part of the bigger picture in terms of how Australia has sought to protect our most vulnerable members of society. And during a pandemic affecting everyone, where all Australians have faced hardship, job losses, business closures, lockdowns, travel bans, and more, all of a sudden, vulnerable becomes a relative term. There is a lot of mental anguish out there. Many Australians face uncertain futures. Migrant communities, particularly in Australia, whose members travelled from afar, bringing with them hopes, dreams, and what few resources they had. With our economies smashed, where can they see their futures? How do we rebuild our economy and our society in a post-COVID world? And in thinking about this task, I think back to the original thought that I posed. Where does the role of government end and that of communities and individuals begin? The governments can only do so much, even in the most developed countries. The effects of COVID-19 will last far longer than the virus itself. We need to be empowering individuals and communities to make their own decisions, take their own risks, and to make decisions appropriate for themselves with government support. And what role do we diplomats play in all of this? Well, if there is anything we can learn from other countries on how to better respond to the needs of vulnerable communities and to promote inclusive recovery programs, we will gladly do so. And I really hope to learn a lot from today's discussion. So once again, thanks very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for your statement and for your very insights into Australian policies towards Indigenous and also towards different communities and how the crisis which we're facing worldwide was being dealt and is being dealt in Australia. And I'm very glad to hear that there are no reported cases among Aboriginal of COVID. That's a huge success considering the whole situation. So thank you very much for this insightful information. Thank you for joining us for Long Nights of Interculturality. ICDO is very happy that you're participating, and also we're very happy to broadcast the documentary from Australia in this week. So thank you once again, and have a wonderful day.
Well, thank you again for inviting me. It was my privilege, and I really look forward to hearing what others say about this very important topic, and keep up the good work.
Her Excellency Khojesta Fana Ebrahimkhel, Ambassador of Afghanistan to the Republic of Austria.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I wanted to be here to personally thank all the sponsors and organizers for putting together such a wonderful event. Let me also thank the panelists for their insightful contributions and ability to focus on the important topic of multidisciplinary approaches to the COVID-19 crisis. Vienna historically has always been a center for dialogue, and there is no better place than having Vienna as a hub for a dialogue. Diversity is an important component of diplomacy and embraces the spirit of multilateralism. I very much admire the objective of ICDO to promote diversity, interculturality, with the goal of bringing people closer together and closing the cultural gaps. This is very much in line with the priorities of the Embassy and Permanent Mission of Afghanistan in Vienna. We share the same goal of understanding and closing the cultural gaps. The ICDO objectives remind me of my very own message that I always share with my fellow Afghans living abroad. While abroad, like here in Austria, I encourage you all to get integrated, educated, polish your skills, and contribute to the society with the goal of becoming role models for your fellow Afghans, countrymen and women, and become ambassadors of peace and of understanding among the cultures. Afghanistan is an ancient land with a glorious cosmopolitan past, which we treasure and aim to preserve for the future generations in a spirit of solidarity and cooperation. Afghanistan attaches great importance to cultural diversity and cultural awareness. We must never forget the power of culture, music, literature, art, sports, and heritage to build resilient and sustainable societies. Teaching the future generation about the principle of solidarity, honest dialogue, and tolerance is imperative to move towards a more peaceful world. For our youth, we should reinforce the values of tolerance, cooperation, and rights of women. I acknowledge the great achievements Afghan citizens have made here in Austria, and I will motivate them to further contribute to the relations between our two countries. The diaspora plays a crucial role stimulating the relation between Austria and Afghanistan. We have taken all necessary precautionary measures to protect the diplomatic mission and its staff by introducing an obligatory mask and distance regulation, as well as regular hand disinfection rule, and also introducing shifts to restrict the number of diplomats in the building. In addition, we have made it possible for the majority of the embassy staff to work from home. Particularly, we have imposed gender-sensitive measures to facilitate the different social roles of our women as mothers, colleagues, and wives. By doing so, we have prioritized the option of home office for all our female colleagues of our mission. In view of the restrictions that have been put in place by the Austrian government, the Afghan mission has developed a new way of working. We have largely switched to mobile office and contact-less communication, such as email, telephone, or video calls, and to virtual and online meetings and conferences. Although in a modified format, our work and cooperation with the Austrian government, authorities, and the Vienna-based international organizations has continued steadily and with little disruption. All of our employees are in good health and maintaining an excellent work performance. I believe we have made a valuable contribution in containing the spread of the virus in this beautiful country that we admire. I applaud the implemented health and security norms and measures by the government of Austria to flatten the curve of COVID-19. I would like to share my utmost appreciation to the government of Austria for its efforts and support to establish health for everyone equally. Let me also extend my appreciation to the people living in Austria. This wouldn't have been possible without their discipline and compliance to the rules. I believe Austria is taking solid national economic measures for the country, but we must not forget that the economy needs a global solution at a regional and international level. The COVID-19 pandemic knows no border, and we attach great importance to the role of international organizations and international community to face this challenge. We must take collective approaches in line with the principle of shared responsibility in order to protect the human rights of all people who are facing incredible hardship in combating this crisis. The Islamic Republic of Afghanistan is also facing the extensive consequences of the coronavirus pandemic and has regularly been implementing measures to limit its spread. In this critical situation, the provision of assistance to the countries in need is essential. Afghanistan now more than ever needs the support and cooperation of the international community in suppressing the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. Multilateral action, diplomacy, and international solidarity are our best tools to combat against this pandemic. Participation and leadership of women in decision-making mechanism is essential. Qualities we see particularly in female leaders. It comes with no surprise. The statistics shows that the response to the coronavirus from governments led by women has been very successful. Even in non-leadership positions, Afghan women have been essential in the coronavirus response. Let me give you just one example. 5 teenage members of the Afghanistan's prize-winning girls robotic team are making ventilators from used car parts to help their country battle the coronavirus pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude. I ask us to come together in this global fight and allocate available resources swiftly and effectively toward those who need it most. It is a critical time to cooperate and communicate, not only by sharing our experience and vision, but also by taking decisive action together as an international community. Thank you.
Without further ado, now I'm happy to start the Long Nights of Interculturality 2020 under UNESCO patronage. And even in times like these that might be difficult, we can still see that we can communicate, we can foster interculturality, make the best out of it, use it as an opportunity of growth. And hopefully we can be an example with this online event here. And I'm happy to get it started. So welcome to the Long Nights of Interculturality and enjoy.